the ongoing effort to, really get a handle on diseases like prostate cancer is just, it's
Right.
constant. It's this drive to figure things out.
Absolutely. And every so often, there's a discovery that feels like a real potential step forward.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. There's this newly identified genetic mutation. It seems to have a pretty significant link to prostate cancer risk, especially for men of Ashkenazi Jewish heritage.
And what's really compelling, I think, is how it could potentially give us a clearer view of who's at higher risk.
Right.
And maybe even open up pathways to more sort of targeted therapies down the line.
That's the core of it. That's what we want to unpack today. Look at this new study, understand this genetic glitch, what it is, and what it might mean for people, for understanding their inherited risk, and maybe even for future treatment options. So think of this as your quick guide to getting up to speed on this, especially if it's relevant for you or your family. Our source for this deep dive is a study just out in European urology focus from researchers at Johns Hopkins Medicine.
Okay, so maybe we should start with the basics. Genes are like, well, the instruction manual for our bodies, right?
Right, the code.
And sometimes permanent changes can happen in that code. We call those mutations.
Okay, let's unpack that a little. So mutations are like typos in our DNA, permanent typos.
Exactly.
And just like a coding error in software can cause problems, these genetic changes can sometimes, pave the way for diseases.
That's a good way to put it. This study actually uses a similar idea, like scrambling a sentence by adding or deleting letters. That can totally change the meaning.
Ah.
And that's pretty much what happens in a specific type called a frameshift mutation.
A frame shift, right. So it's not just swapping one letter. It kind of throws the whole reading frame off.
Precisely. It garbles the instructions downstream. Now, these researchers were looking specifically at loss-of-function mutations, or LOFF mutations, in what are called germline cells.
Germline cells. Those are the reproductive ones, eggs and sperm.
That's right. They pass genetic info down through generations. So a mutation there can be inherited. And if you have a loss-of-function mutation in a gene that's supposed to, say, protect against cancer, losing that function can, unfortunately, make someone more susceptible.
Right. Makes sense. So that sets the stage for this big discovery. Tell us about the Johns Hopkins investigation. What exactly did they do?
Well, they did a really detailed analysis. They looked at 65 specific germline LOFF variants.
Okay.
And they looked for these in a large group, over 3,700 Ashkenazi Jewish men who'd been treated for prostate cancer. Then, crucially, they compared that group to a massive control group, over 100,000 Ashkenazi Jewish men without the disease.
Wow. That's a lot of people, a huge data set. How did they even start to sift through that?
Yeah, it required some pretty sophisticated statistical tools. They were essentially hunting for patterns, looking for which of these gene variants were showing up more often in the men who actually developed prostate cancer.
And did they find something initially?
They did. Their first pass pointed towards 3 genes where these LOFF mutations seemed more common in the cancer group. But then, of course, you have to verify that.
Ah, right. The validation step. Crucial. Yeah. What did that involve?
They took those 3 candidate genes and looked at them in 2 completely separate groups of Ashkenazi Jewish men over in the UK. Again, comparing men with prostate cancer to controls.
And did the finding hold up?
For one of them, yes. A gene called MMS22L. It consistently showed that same link, higher rates in the men with prostate cancer across all these groups.
MMS22L. Okay, so that's the gene we're focusing on, but it wasn't just any mutation in that gene, was it? It was something specific.
Exactly right. When they dug deeper, they found that the vast majority of the men, both in the Hopkins group and the UK groups, who had any low F mutation in MMS22L actually had the exact same one, this specific frameshift mutation called F722Fs. It was like finding the same very specific typo over and over again.
That's really striking, and I gather they didn't just stop there. They looked for even more confirmation.
They did, which really strengthens the finding. They checked data from 3 more patient groups in the U.S., places like University of Michigan Duke, North Shore University Health System, and GoPath Labs.
Okay.
And in all of those independent data sets, the link, this association with the F722F's mutation, it held strong. That kind of replication across different centers is really important.
Okay, so we've got this F722X mutation in the MMS22L gene showing up more often in Ashkenazi Jewish men with prostate cancer. But, how much more often? How strong is that connection statistically? I think they used an odds ratio. Can you maybe break that down for us?
Sure. An odds ratio is basically a way to compare the odds. So you look at the odds of having prostate cancer if you have the mutation versus the odds of having it if you don't have the mutation.
Right.
A ratio of 1 means no difference. Anything above 1 means increased odds.
What did they find here for F722S?
The overall odds ratio came out to 4.9.
4.9, okay.
Which the researchers described as a significantly strong correlation.
Yeah.
So almost 5 times higher odds associated with carrying this specific mutation in this population.
Wow, nearly 5 times. That really puts it into perspective. And didn't they also compare this risk level to other known genetic factors?
Yes, they did. They pointed out that this level of risk, this 4.9 odds ratio, is actually quite similar in strength to mutations in other well-known DNA repair genes, like BRCA2.
Oh, right, BRCA2. People might have heard of that one.
Exactly. And BRCA2 is already an established risk factor for prostate cancer in Ashkenazi Jewish men. So putting F722s in that same league really highlights its potential clinical importance.
Okay, so a higher risk, definitely. But the research hinted at a couple of other things, too. Firstly, something about the aggressiveness of the cancer.
That's right. The data suggested that among the men who had this F722 mutation and did get prostate cancer, they were more likely to have more aggressive forms of the disease.
Meaning the cancer might grow faster or be more likely to spread.
Potentially, yes. Yeah. That's the implication, which of course is really important information.
Absolutely. Knowing that could maybe influence screening or how aggressively treatment is approached if cancer is found. And the second point was about treatment sensitivity, something about PRP inhibitors.
Yes, this is quite fascinating. So the MMS22L gene itself, its function is related to DNA repair within our cells.
Okay.
PRP inhibitors are a class of cancer drugs that also mess with DNA repair, but a different pathway. The thinking is, if a cancer cell already has a faulty DNA repair system because of this F722 mutation, then hitting it with a PRP inhibitor, which blocks another repair pathway, might be particularly effective. It could be like a double whammy that the cancer cell just can't handle.
Ah, I see. That makes sense. So it could make those cancer cells potentially more vulnerable to that specific type of drug.
That's the hypothesis. It suggests a possible avenue for more personalized treatment.
But just to be clear, this study didn't actually test if patients with the mutation responded better to PRP inhibitors, right? It's more of a biological connection they're pointing out.
Exactly. The researchers are clear about that. This study identified the risk link and the association with aggressiveness. The PRP inhibitor connection is based on the known function of the gene and is a really logical and exciting area for future research.
Right. It points towards a potential way to predict who might benefit most from those drugs.
Precisely.
So that leads us perfectly into what's next. What are the researchers planning to do now?
Well, they definitely plan to investigate this F722F SLOVF mutation further. They want to understand the precise biological nuts and bolts of how it actually contributes to prostate cancer developing.
Digging deeper into the how.
Exactly. And also exploring further that potential link to treatment response.
And beyond the basic science, are they thinking about practical applications, like for screening or something?
Absolutely. They see potential for maybe incorporating this mutation into screening efforts, to help identify Ashkenazi Jewish men who might have this higher inherited risk.
Okay, so using it for risk assessment.
Yes. And as we just talked about, really exploring its potential as a predictive marker. Could testing for this mutation help figure out which men, if they develop prostate cancer, are likely to respond well to PRP inhibitor therapy?
So it feels like this discovery could have real-world implications, potentially changing how we screen for risk, maybe even how we treat the disease in this population. Stepping back for a moment, what's the bigger picture here? What does this kind of finding tell us more broadly?
I think it really underscores the power of digging into the genetics of cancer risk. When we can pinpoint specific inherited factors like this F722F's mutation, it gives us such valuable clues.
Clues about who's more susceptible.
Yes, and potentially clues about how their cancer might behave, and maybe even how it might respond to certain treatments. This kind of knowledge is really fundamental to that whole push towards more personalized medicine, making treatments more effective because they're better tailored.
It really is amazing work unraveling these complex genetic threads. Okay, so let's quickly recap the main points from our deep dive today. The big news is the identification of this specific mutation, F722s, in the MMS22L gene.
And the key finding is its strong association with a significantly increased risk, almost 5 times higher, of developing prostate cancer, specifically in men of Ashkenazi Jewish descent.
Right, and not just increased risk, but also a potential link, based on the early data, to more aggressive forms of the disease when it does occur.
And then there's that really intriguing possibility, based on the gene's function, that carrying this mutation might make tumors more sensitive to PRP inhibitor drugs.
Which could open doors for more targeted therapies in the future, although more research is needed there.
Definitely.
It just highlights how vital understanding these genetic details is for improving, everything from detection to treatment. It really makes you think, doesn't it? How many other specific genetic clues like this are still out there waiting to be found? Not just for prostate cancer, but for all sorts of diseases, potentially changing how we understand and manage health for different groups of people in the future.